It came for the father first in his sleep. His jaw would seize without warning, clamping shut so violently he could not speak, could not eat, could not scream. And in the dark of his own farmhouse, a voice with no body would lean close to his ear and tell him, calmly, that it was going to kill him. It had already told the family how. One December morning, a small glass vial of dark liquid appeared beside his bed. When they asked what it was, the voice answered that it had put it there, that it had poured the poison down old Jack Bell's throat while he slept. They tested a single drop on the family cat. The animal was dead within minutes. John Bell never woke up again. And at his funeral, as they lowered him into the Tennessee ground, the mourners heard something drifting across the graveyard. A woman's voice, singing, cheerful, triumphant. The thing that had hunted him for 3 years had come to watch him buried, and it was happy. This is the story of the Bell Witch, described by researchers as the most documented haunting in American history. It has a name, it has witnesses, and it is the only entity in American history said to have killed a human being. To understand how terrifying this became, you have to understand how ordinary it started. John Bell was a respected man, a prosperous farmer. Around 1804, he moved his family from North Carolina to a stretch of rich farmland along the Red River in Robertson County, Tennessee. He worked hard and bought land, eventually accumulating more than 300 acres. He raised his wife Lucy and their children in a large log farmhouse, and he was a devout, church-going man. For 13 years, the Bells lived in peace. They were the kind of family a frontier community is built around. And then, in 1817, that peace ended. Not with a scream, but with something far stranger. It began in the fields. One evening in 1817, John Bell was walking his land when he saw an animal he could not identify. It had the body of a dog and the head of a rabbit. It simply stood there, watching him. Bell was a hunter. He raised his gun and fired. The creature vanished, not ran. Vanished. It was not the only thing. His son Drew reported a bird of impossible, extraordinary size lifting off a fence post. His daughter Betsy saw a girl in a green dress swinging from the limb of a large oak tree where no girl should have been. And a man named Dean, one of the people enslaved on the Bell farm, said that on the evenings he walked to visit his wife, a huge black dog began following him, always at a distance, always watching. Strange animals appearing and disappearing around one family's land. But these were only the opening notes, because whatever these things were, they were about to come inside. It started with knocking. At night, a hard rapping began on the outside walls and along the doors. John Bell would light a lamp, go outside, and search. He found nothing, and the moment he lay back down, it would begin again. Then the sounds moved inside. The family heard something gnawing, a slow, deliberate chewing on the wooden bedposts in the dark. They heard what sounded like invisible dogs fighting in the middle of the room. And worst of all, they heard the dragging of heavy chains across the floorboards when there were no chains in the house at all. The Bell children would wake to feel their bed covers being pulled slowly off their beds by unseen hands. They would grab the blankets and pull back, and something on the other side would pull harder. For a devout frontier family, there was no explanation. Just night after night of a house that would not let them sleep, and then it found its favorite target. The entity's attention fixed on the youngest daughter, Betsy Bell, and it began to hurt her. Something unseen would slap her hard enough to leave a red print on her cheek. It pulled her hair until she cried out. It pinched her, pricked her with pins, and left welts and bruises across her face and arms, marks that witnesses said they saw with their own eyes. The attacks came in front of people. That is what made them so hard to dismiss. Betsy could be standing in a room full of family and neighbors, and her head would suddenly snap sideways as if struck by an invisible hand. John Bell, desperate, told his closest friend, a man named James Johnston, and asked for help. Johnston and his wife came to spend the night, to see it for themselves, and perhaps to prove it was nonsense. They did not prove it was nonsense. They experienced the noises. They felt the covers pulled from their bed. And in the morning, James Johnston spoke to it directly, demanding in the name of God to know what it was. And the thing in the house answered him. At first, it had been only a faint whisper, like an old woman's voice singing words no one could make out. But it grew stronger and clearer, until it could hold a conversation. And what it said was deeply unsettling. The voice sang hymns perfectly. It quoted long passages of scripture, word for word. It could be heard in several parts of the house at the same time. It knew things it should not have known, private conversations and secrets and events happening miles away. It began addressing the family by name. It held debates with visiting preachers. It gossiped about the neighbors. It displayed a sharp, cruel, disturbingly human personality. Eventually, the community settled on a name for it. Some accounts say it called itself Kate. And so the thing tormenting the Bell family became known as Kate, the Bell Witch. It seemed almost fond of Lucy Bell, the mother, singing her favorite hymns when she was ill. But for two members of the family, it reserved a pure and focused hatred. Betsy, the daughter, and above all, John Bell, the father. And it had already announced its intention. It said it would torment Betsy, and it said it would kill John Bell. By now, word had spread across Tennessee. A talking spirit that quoted scripture and slapped a farmer's daughter was the most extraordinary spectacle in the region. Visitors came from miles around to hear it. And according to the most famous legend attached to this case, one of those visitors was a man named Andrew Jackson, the war hero who would one day become president of the United States. I want to be honest with you because this channel deals in what can be verified. This episode is the hardest part of the story to confirm, and many historians treat it as folklore. But it is such a central part of the legend that it has to be told. As the story goes, Jackson traveled from Nashville with a group of men to investigate. As their carriage approached the Bell property, it simply stopped. The wheels locked. The horses strained and could not move it an inch. And then a sharp, disembodied voice rang out from the darkness beside the road. It told them they could proceed now, and that it would see them again that night. The carriage rolled freely forward. The legend says one man in Jackson's party boasted he could deal with the witch. That night, the voice turned on him, mocking him, then driving him from the house howling. And Jackson, the man who feared almost nothing, is said to have wanted to leave by morning, muttering that he would rather fight the entire British army than spend another night with the Bell Witch. True or invented, the story tells you how large this haunting loomed in the American imagination. But the entity had not forgotten its promise. As the months passed, John Bell's health began to collapse. His face would seize and twitch, the muscles locking. His tongue would swell in his mouth until he could barely swallow. His jaw would clamp shut for hours, leaving him unable to eat or speak. Doctors of the era had no answers. And through all of it, the voice was relentless. It cursed him constantly, calling him Old Jack Bell. It mocked his suffering. It told him over and over that it would not stop until he was dead. By the winter of 1820, John Bell was bedridden and failing. And then, on a December morning, the family found him in a deep stupor they could not wake him from. Nearby, they discovered a small vial of dark liquid they did not recognize. When they asked the voice what it was, Kate answered gleefully that she had given Old Jack a dose that would finish him, that she had poured it down his throat in the night. To test it, someone touched a drop to the family cat. The animal died almost immediately. John Bell never regained consciousness. He died that day. And at his funeral, as the community gathered to bury one of their most respected men, the mourners said they heard the voice again, floating over the grave. not weeping, singing a cheerful song celebrating his death. To this day, the Bell Witch is often called the only entity in American history formally blamed by a community for killing a human being. With the father dead, the entity kept one more promise. Betsy Bell was engaged to be married to a young man from the neighborhood named Joshua Gardner. They were in love. It should have been the happy ending to a nightmare. But Kate hated the match. The voice tormented Betsy about it relentlessly, day after day, demanding that she never marry Joshua Gardner. The attacks intensified whenever the two were together. Finally, worn down by years of torment and unwilling to drag the man she loved into it, Betsy broke off the engagement. She and Joshua ended things by a river and went their separate ways. And with that, the accounts say, the entity was satisfied. Its focus faded. The voice announced it would leave, but that it would return one day. The violent haunting that had gripped the family for years finally went quiet. Betsy Bell lived a long life, but she carried that childhood with her forever. Now, as always, we have to stop and be honest, because a story this old and this famous attracts embellishment like nothing else. And there are real, rational reasons to doubt large parts of it. Here is the biggest problem. Almost everything we know about the Bell Witch comes from sources written long after the events. The most detailed account, the one that gives us the dialogue and the vial of poison and the Andrew Jackson visit, was published in 1894, more than 70 years after John Bell died. Its author claimed to be drawing on an eyewitness diary, but that diary has never been found, which means the version everyone repeats may be as much creative writing as history. The Andrew Jackson episode, so central to the legend, has almost no solid documentation. Historians who have searched for hard evidence that Jackson ever visited the Bell farm have largely come up empty. And John Bell's death? A skeptic sees not a poisoning by a demon, but a man in his late 60s suffering from a neurological illness, facial seizures, and difficulty swallowing, and a slow decline, conditions that medicine of 1820 had no name for. The mysterious vial and the dead cat make a chilling story. They are also exactly the kind of detail a later writer would add. There's even a human suspect in the folklore itself. A neighbor named Kate Batts, with whom John Bell had a bitter business dispute, was blamed by some in the community, which is why the entity is sometimes called Kate. And there have always been quiet suggestions that an unhappy young girl at the center of a strict frontier household might have had reasons to make a house seem haunted. That is the rational case. An old man's illness, a family's grief, and a writer, decades later, spinning it all into America's greatest ghost story. And yet, the skeptical explanation, as strong as it is, has to account for one stubborn fact. This wasn't a private haunting whispered about by one family. For years, a stream of visitors, neighbors and preachers and curious strangers and respected men of the county came to the Bell farm specifically to debunk it. And accounts agree that many left shaken, insisting they had heard the voice, felt the blows, witnessed the covers torn from beds. You can dismiss a frightened girl. It is harder to dismiss a farmhouse full of grown adults over 3 full years in a tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone. And the skeptics writing today were not standing in that cabin in 1809. Like us, they are reading accounts written by others. On the central question, what those people actually experienced, we are left with 2 possibilities. The witnesses who swore something was there, and the doubters who insist there must be an explanation. You get to decide which you trust. Today, the Bell Farm is quiet farmland near Adams, Tennessee. A historical marker stands where the family's ordeal took place. A reconstructed log cabin welcomes visitors, and a few artifacts from the original home survive. A chimney stone, an old iron kettle. And there is the cave. The Bell Witch Cave, on the edge of the old property, has become one of the most famous haunted sites in America. Visitors report cold spots, strange sounds, photographs that come back with things in them that were not there. People say that when they take a stone from the cave, misfortune follows them home until they mail it back. The caretakers reportedly receive returned stones in the mail regularly, with letters begging forgiveness. Because the entity, remember, made a promise before it left. It said it would come back. And the legend claims it kept that promise too, returning to haunt John Bell's descendants generations later. So what was the Bell Witch? Was it a genuine haunting? An intelligent, cruel entity that hunted a man to his grave? Was it the illness of an aging father, magnified by grief and fear into something monstrous? Was it a lonely, frightened girl? Or was it a brilliant piece of fiction, written decades later and told so well that we still repeat it 200 years on? Here is what we can say. A real family lived and suffered on that land. A real man, John Bell, sickened and died in the winter of 1820. A whole community remembered something extraordinary happening there, remembered it so vividly that we are still talking about it today. Everything else lives in the space between history and legend, and maybe that is exactly where the Bell Witch wants to stay, just out of reach, impossible to prove, impossible to forget. Because the most frightening thing about this story isn't the voice, or the vial, or the singing at the grave. It's that it promised to come back. Do you think the Bell Witch was real, or the greatest ghost story ever written? Tell me in the comments. And if you have ever brought something home from a place you shouldn't have, you might want to think about sending it back. Sleep well, if you can.